Peter Antonelli. Welcome to Moon Creative Lab. We're happy to host you all today with what I'm sure will be an interesting conversation with lots of folks, both from the HR space as well as the benefactors of the panel discussion, which is, I know, a handful of founders and startups as well. So welcome. I'll just give a little bit of an overview about Moon. This is really a succinct version, so we can add a little bit of context to the conversation. But tonight, of course, we're here for the Founder's Guide to HR expert panel. We have a handful of folks that we'll be hearing from tonight, so I'm excited about that. Moon Creative Lab. So how many folks in the room are familiar with Mitsui? Okay, so all the residents that work at Moon are familiar, most of the audience as well. Mitsui is a giant corporation based out of Japan, but with global reach, right? And so when we talk about global reach, 40,000 employees, 16 business units, cutting across a diverse landscape of different focus areas, hundreds of subsidiaries, so generally massive, right? And so Mitsui, about 7 years ago, worked on an internal initiative looking into the future a little bit, and were reflecting on what would make their business and their capabilities differentiated, right? So that they could compete with other folks, maintain relevance and so forth. And the outcome from that project was, okay, there needs to be a new fluency within Mitsui, right? They're excellent at mergers and acquisitions, they're excellent at identifying new opportunities, but there was not a deep fluency in new business creation. And so during this initiative, they identified, okay, we need to become fluent in new business creation, but how do we do that? And out of that project came Moon Creative Lab. But Moon Creative Lab represents what goes into that fluency, right? And so the mindset and the skill set necessary to quickly, right, think through a lens of innovation, in many ways not be mired by a lot of the things that slow down big organizations like Mitsui as well. So Moon was founded, and initially it was solely in service of, okay, how can we help shore up Mitsui's capabilities and set them up for success from a new business creation standpoint. We obviously have a place here in our studio today, but we also have a beautiful studio, and it's called Lodosanto in Tokyo. It's a little bit larger. We have more folks there, probably about 60, maybe we have 30 or so here. And we're a global community of designers, business creators, engineers, product folks, marketers, operations, so on and so forth. So quite dynamic. And we talk about our differentiation as our people, right? The work that we do is not only in supporting Mitsui, business units, processes, capabilities, and so forth, but ultimately to think about how we can have the most impact we can possibly have by virtue of what we'll call a home run. It just means a big win, right? A big industry-changing product, service. It could be the industry itself that we're introducing to a market. And we think about having these big wins, these home runs, at the center of a Venn diagram that looks something like this, right? So in short, if you think about Mitsui at the scale that I described earlier, we have lots of different assets, people, technologies, capabilities, so on and so forth, right, at our disposal to really leverage and understand how we can work with them. Increasingly, though, we have lots of corporate partners as well that are facing similar or maybe different challenges, but are looking for new ways to move forward efficiently and with as much impact as they possibly can. And we incubate a lot here at Moon, right? And so we have a growing community of startups and founders across industries, across the globe, that we have invited into Moon for a period of time, surrounded with resources, with know-how, hopefully, to help them become autonomous in their own respective products and services. So we look at this landscape of different assets, right, and think about, okay, how can we bring them together in unique ways that hopefully are going to provide something quite new to a market, or to a corporation, or to a startup. And we're rarely working in just one of these spheres. And so that's a little bit of the differentiation, and I think of it as like the magic, the potential of what Moon can deliver. This is just a little bit of a preface to the next slide, which is a quick overview of what the past 5 or 6 years have looked like from a quantitative standpoint, right? And so in the early days, and a little bit now, we would invite people within Mitsui, remember those 40,000 individuals, to submit their ideas. And we would look at all of those ideas and we would hopefully make some good bets on what seemed like it had legs or not. And we would bring them in to Moon. Again, resources, human resources, time guidance, etc., money in some cases, to build them up to a certain degree. 800 or so have been submitted over the years. We've chosen about 150 of them. And those ventures have gotten the support that I mentioned. And of them, over time, about 110 have folded, as is quite natural in this environment, right? We're proud about this number, which is we've had the opportunity to partner quite directly with Mitsui business units as well. So really delivering on our promise of why Moon was founded in the first place. We have fortunately launched 11 or so new companies, new cos, one of which is Veraloom here in the corner. There are many others that we're quite proud of and that are really standing on their own in their respective markets, which is wonderful. And then lastly, we host a lot of workshops. And it's not just a workshop such that our participants leave with something that they've learned. We see these as a front door, right? And so a workshop as a front door means not only are hopefully we're lending some new skill set or mindset way of working towards the folks that are joining us, but we're starting a new relationship that will hopefully contribute to that event diagram, that ecosystem that I mentioned earlier. So that's a little bit about us. Thanks for bearing with me during the introduction. This is a QR code that will sign you up essentially for news and events. And so if you're curious, I would scan this, and if you're kind of on the fence, talk to me or one of us later. We can share more details with you. We do host a lot of events here. We try to aim for a couple a month, and they vary from pitch events to topical or industry-related speaking events or general networking events. So, we would love to see any one of you here moving forward. This is one way in, there are many. So I'll stop there. Thank you again for listening through the introduction. We're excited about the panel discussion. So I will hand it off at this moment to Andrew. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Peter. To kind of kick it off, tonight we will be having the panel discussion of the Founder's Guide to HR expert panel. So first I would like to invite the panel to come and sit here. So we will be having so just so everybody knows, today's focus is about building the right HR foundation from the ground up in partnership. Vensure Employer Solutions is doing this in partnership with Moon Creative Lab. So this is part one of a three-part series. The next discussion will be focused around more scaling your startup and how to effectively grow from about 20 to 50 employees. And then we'll have a third panel discussion about developing a sustainable business, planning, developing, and building an infrastructure for over 100 plus employees. And for tonight, the objective really is to focus on how to equip startup founders with essential HR tools and knowledge, and then as well focusing on scaling from that one hire to about 10 employees and building a good foundation. And so a lot of our discussion today will be focusing around establishing a purpose-driven company identity, as well laying a compliant foundation, and how to be able to hire strategically as you are beginning and developing. So to introduce our panel tonight, we will be having, tonight as part of our expert HR panel, we have Renee Gonzalez from Level Up Success Innovations, as well Donna Hamlin from To Go Advisory Group, who heads up their fractional HR division. Paul Camus, who is a startup mentor and VC fund advisor as well. Michelle McCune, who is the head of HR for Moon Creative Lab, and Monique Riley as well, who's one of the HR people here. So we'll kind of start off first and having a discussion about what do you what do you all view as the important things that startup founders need to make sure that they get right, kind of off the bat? What are the big things to focus on first?
Not HR?
Well, no, HR.
I mean, the first thing you really want to do that I always say is to get the right advisors around the table with you so that you are not trying to make mistakes, you're getting help before you make a mistake. Now, HR is an element of that, but there's a lot of insights that you can spare if you get those advisors early. And all the research that I've done says if you do that right up front, you will save yourself so many mistakes and problems, and your success rate to getting where you want to go goes much better.
Yeah. Any other comments?
Sure. Every startup I meet, I ask them to stand up with no warning or preparation and tell me what their value proposition is. Because if you don't have a North Star that you can look to when the skies are gray, you're not going to get very far. And as I tell them, the value proposition is the answer to two simple questions. What are you doing? Why should anybody care? And they can be very nuanced answers, but if you can't answer each of them at least in some measure, then you're probably not ready to get started asking anybody for money or asking people to join you as part of your team. So that's a big one for me.
I think it's important to understand, especially if you're getting ready to hire employees, understand what regulations are there, understand what your boundaries are, and some of the young companies that I've dealt with in the past, you don't know what you don't know, right? And so you get into these environments where you're starting to bring in employees and you're starting to build your company, and what happens is that you find yourself in trouble because you don't know what the laws are, you don't know the areas that are most liability prone. And that's always important, is to develop that foundation of compliance so that you know what you're getting into and you can prepare yourself for potential pitfalls.
And if I could just jump on that real quick, we get started small to the world coming here, a lot of the medical devices or maybe fintech, and there's a lot of regulation that you have to know here, but you're going to the UK or you're going to Zimbabwe, it's going to be different there too. So you got to appreciate the depth and breadth and complexity of regulation, especially health and finance in other parts of the world, and here, of course, where things are occasionally for some other people.
John.
Yeah, I think when you're thinking about hiring, it's really critical when you're thinking about hiring your first people is you have to really think what's going to balance your team out. Those first hires are the most critical, so you look at it less as a job description and what's an ad. You know, if you're a technical founder or you and your co-founder are technical, then think about what's the ad that I can bring. Is it the business person? Is it the product person? Is it the marketing person or the sales person? Because you really need those critical first hires, and then really make sure that you, before you even start hiring anybody, you kind of have what I call your culture identical. What kind of company do you want to be? What's the most critical, values for you? If you were, everybody's worked at a company before, what was like the ideal things that they really, where you said, if I was my own boss, I would be like this. If I had my own company, I would make sure, like, what are the values that you really hold? At Moon, we have one of the things that was really important. We're a human-centered company, which is both for customers that we're really asking the why is this important to you, what are your problems, asking those big questions, but also internally, being human-centered in terms of, I think it really helps during COVID on you need to, when we were returning to the office, let's do it slowly. So really just thinking through, what kind of people, and then just really quickly on your first hires, I think making sure you're really explaining the value proposition to your hires, because you need pretty skilled people, ideally, when you're building that startup, because you need to bring in those complementary skill sets, and you have to sell them. Maybe you're pitching them because they might have a great job that they need to leave, and you have to sell them on why us. And I think really having that why will really help.
Tony, do you have anything you would like to add?
No, I was going to kind of piggyback off of that and what Paul said, but I think it's like, as founders, obviously, you're always pitching for investment, but you're also, when you're hiring, you're pitching to have someone on your team. So I think, obviously, from a skill set, totally, but then you have to think about, like, immediately, even from, like, a first hire, you have to think about sort of what culture you want to build, and I think that's intentional. So you have to start even from the beginning and be very clear about that, even if it's something that sort of seems like a second thought. But I think being really intentional from the beginning, even to someone, having someone hired onto your team is very important. Because it just sets like clear intentions from the beginning. Because you want them to help build whatever it is you're trying to build and sell that product as well.
Yeah, I mean, so I think, kind of the group consensus is we need to understand our value, right? We need to understand what our company needs to look like. Having a good set of advisors, right? Because, right, I mean, you can't do it by yourself, right? You
shouldn't.
Shouldn't try, right?
You have a dream in your head, but when you put more diversity of thought around the table, you're going to get better creative solutions. So bring them together and think it together. You're going to end up with a much clearer vision and values that will be clear, and that's what employees under consideration are trying to weigh. Is this a culture I want to step in or not? And they have a right to say no if they don't like what they're hearing. And then, of course, once you've said it, you've got to live it, which means you want to engage them to prove that that culture is alive. And then you want to honor them every time you see it being done, because they become the ambassadors for the growth of the company outside of the business, as well as new employees that join them as well. So it's the framework and the foundation for what it's going to feel like every day you work. Is that a question?
Yeah, I was just curious if you had like a good example and bad example that you faced while in your experience, like a founder's journey where like you saw something they were doing right at the story. If you have any story, you would love to hear that. Okay.
You have one
I
that
do.
you said no.
I'm not an HR professional, not strictly speaking. My experience with HR consists of like getting fired unexpectedly or breaking up fistfights among a blue-collar crew. But so I'm a startup coach in the overall, but HR is maybe my favorite topic because it's the one thing people shy away from, or if they've had a job, they're like, HR,
Yeah.
And I think to your point, I've met founders that I don't think are qualified to run their companies. And I'll say to them, don't take my word for it, but my considered opinion, what I've learned of you in the last 30 seconds or 5 minutes, not a long time, but maybe I have a good radar for this, and I'll say, I think you need to maybe think about stepping aside. Any founder should make him or herself obsolete eventually to hand it off and go live a life of leisure or start the next thing. And it's really hard for people to hear that because it's usually their baby, and they're very, very emotionally attached, not just professional. So I also had to fire a good friend. That wasn't any fun at all. So I think
I've done that too.
yeah, when it comes to people, there's infinite varieties of trouble they can get into or bad situations, but it's your job as a founder to be ready to put up with that no matter how much it may hit you in the pit of your stomach.
And I'm going to piggyback on that because there is a founder, business owner that I know who, he runs a very small coffee shop. And one of his challenges is that he wants to be everything all the time. And you just can't do that as a founder. You have to trust your employees to run your business because you can't do it by yourself. And so this particular business owner, because he struggles with that and he tries to own everything and do everything, he had to actually shut down his business for 2 weeks to go on vacation because he didn't trust anybody to do it for him. Talk about a huge financial loss. And so as a founder, your number one priority is to empower your employees to run your company for you so you can walk away and you can do the things that you want to do to watch your company grow.
I think there's real reflection that goes with the person who's going to create a business to understand what their strengths are and where they can lean on other people or not. I looked at a gentleman who was a serial CEO of innovation companies, and he knew his strengths would go for the first 2 years, and after that he had to get a real CEO. And he has done that 18 times. And the investors are so proud of the results by his understanding that now it's at a stage where I don't belong, and he goes and does it again. If he calls with an idea to these investors, they say, don't even tell me what it is, how much money do you need? Because they all got rich off of it. Now, he understood himself well enough to make the decision that he needed talent that would fill in and grow it. Now, if you think about where your strengths are and what you need in the way of other people around you, that's when you start to handpick the right talent that's going to balance it out and make it successful.
I think the biggest thing I've seen that's a mistake too is kind of piggybacking what you said is hiring your friends.
Yeah.
You know, that because you have a startup, you think, oh, they'll be a culture fit, I know them, I know how they act, and then you have to be their boss and it doesn't work because you switch the line from friend to boss, and then they don't want to take directions from you, like we're friends, or they oftentimes, they maybe don't have the skills you need, and you really need that deeply skilled person, and this is not that person. And then you have to go and fire your friend, which is the worst, because it ruins your friendship. And I think being really, really thoughtful about, that first friend, I think it's especially, I think when also working as co-founders, really thinking through what are each other's strengths and really delegating the authority so that there's clear distinctions on you're really good at this, you say this, I'm really good at this. Well, what are we gonna, what are the things where you have autonomy to make decisions? What are the things we make decisions together? And like really labeling that up front causes a heck of a lot less arguments. It's like relationships, like doing that kind of same thing. But I think, I've had to help friends, like coach them on how to like fire their friends and it's their buddies and stuff, and it's really difficult.
The one exception to that is a company in Florida called Skymeer that the gentleman started 2 years ago, and he handpicked 6 people that he had worked with in other companies in the past. They were friends, but they are partners in crime for all the work they've done in the past. So it was like the band was coming back together again. And they are working beautifully together because they're pros, they have experience, and they know what they're doing, and they care. That can be an exception. It's not just friendship, it's knowledge of their work. That
And
can
merit.
So what's, like, when you're kind of thinking about, obviously, we want to avoid probably hiring friends, right? But what are some of the characteristics you might be looking for in that first hire or even in a fellow co-founder?
really depends on what the entity is trying to do. It's case specific. If you know that you've got some immediate things you need, you want to find someone who can handle that half while you're doing the other half. But if you think you can do it okay and take your time, that's all right too. You don't have to rush to turn everybody into employees out the gate, but you should think about what you have in mind for your organization, what kinds of roles are going to be necessary so that you're thinking about it in the whole view before you start. Let me just get Jack on now and then we'll figure it out. Yeah. I think the organizational design is really important on a piece of paper before you get started.
Yeah, making sure you're taking that time to have it thought out, like, why am I hiring this person? Why is this person going to be, what type of role do we need to be filling rather than, and I think as well, like, one of the things that comes up, I don't know if the panel agrees or disagrees, but, looking for the weaknesses, founders should be looking for people that help, fill the weaknesses that they have, right? Rather than not just like people who fit, but people who can strategically help move the company forward, right?
And you don't have to load it up. I mean, HR, for example, that should be fractional, that should be from outside helping in. Yes, you have compliance issues, you have things. You don't have to know those. You get somebody who does, and they'll take care of it for you so you can keep the brain on the important stuff in the business, right? And just feel confident that it's being handled properly. And it isn't a full-time thing, that early stage, so it's okay that you have fractional support that you need. And
I'm sorry, go ahead.
it would be the same with other functions as well. But think about only what you need and get someone who's confident can handle it so you don't have to think about it.
I've seen small companies where it is bringing in your buddy, and what happens is the buddy is a great friend, but they may not be an expert in that specific area that you have them covering. And so when you're looking at those key individuals to head up those arms of your company, you want to make sure that they are strong enough in their skill set to be able to carry that for you, because you know what you know, and you know what you specialize in. I know that I'm great at HR, but when it comes to engineering, couldn't do it if I wanted to. And so if I were to get into a company where I needed engineering, I would find that person who specializes in that area to carry that specific arm of the company.
I think you mentioned the interview process. It might be a long-term relationship you try to turn into a working partnership. It could be someone you found on Craigslist, hopefully not. I've done that too. That's a crapshoot. But I'm like a really bad interviewer because someone will come in and have the resume and I'll say, I'm sure your resume is accurate. Thank you. Put it aside. Let's just sit there and stare at them for a moment. Not to make them uncomfortable, but to say this is not about the jobs you've had in the past. That's the past. I'm interested in the future. And what do you understand about what we're trying to do? And it's really interesting to see how they perform. Some folks kind of seize up. Some folks think the informal structure of that kind of, it's more of a conversation than an interview. And I'll put them at ease by saying, like within certain bounds, you need to hire someone who can code, you got to have someone with coding experience. But the old hire for talent, not for skill. I mean, I hire for skill, not experience. Is a great empowering thing because a lot of folks don't expect that. They hope their resume meets all the terms that were in the ad. And that's a pretty narrow-minded way to hire someone, especially early on in a company's growth. When shortcomings in one or two in a person can have a much bigger impact. If you've got 4 people and one is bad, as opposed to if Google hires someone who turns out to be a dud, it's probably going to be okay.
Yeah, I mean, especially in a startup where, things can change pretty rapidly, correct?
Comfortable with risk, change, and pivoting, and outright failure. You have to have it.
And whatever you do, interview personally, physically, anybody. AI now is creating all these tools where you can hire someone you never met, and it can be a disaster. We were in a panel that Seth was involved in where there was a gentleman who was doing AI tools and told a woman in HR of another business that he knows about, she's all proud because she's using AI tools, and said, make sure they're clear. Make sure they're working. And his wife, coincidentally, was interested in a position in that woman's business. And he made up a whole application, used his voice and turned it into hers, submitted the whole thing, and she got an offer. And then he called her and said, your system needs attention. So make sure you are sitting down and spending quality time with people before you give them the I'd like invitation.
I was going to say on the flip side of that too, I know obviously with the startup you're moving very quickly, things are changing. I think also it is important though from the less like compliance tactical side of HR though to set expectations maybe of like what, not only obviously what the role is going to entail and like how you want the future to look in your plan, but setting expectations of like what success or great might look like for that role. I think even in the early stages is important. Especially, I know obviously if you're hiring for a startup, you're most likely hiring from an ecosystem of people who are familiar to that landscape. But I think setting that up is really useful because the world of startups is very vague and ambiguous. So I think being as clear as you can is useful for anyone in that space.
Well, yeah, and as well, a lot of employees kind of run into this that they get frustrated in their jobs because they don't know what success looks like, right? So I think, to your point, I mean, a lot of people, setting those clear expectations, what are we trying to do, right? And, really kind of, and that's kind of on the founders, correct? To really kind of create that go-to market strategy, what do we need to achieve as a team, right? Should instead of looking at maybe individual expectations, should it be looking at what are the expectations for the company or for the team? What are your thoughts?
Both short and long-term thinking. When you're showing employees where your dream is going, they feel like they own it too. And you want them to stay and see that success as part of what they're contributing to. So yes, it's fine to talk to the team daily stuff or weekly, monthly, whatever the immediate goals are, but always remind them of context where you're going for long. That's what keeps them there.
The communication needs to come from the top down. It's very easy for departments to get focused on their specific goals, but if their goals do not meet the goals at the higher level and continuing on, then what happens is you have your boat being rowed in multiple different directions. And so it's important that those goals and those values and so on are all communicated from the top down so that each department is working towards that same finish line.
And there's probably no problem that can't be solved by communication. It's amazing how many folks don't seem to realize that. I learned relatively recently, like last Thursday, I think it was, that that's the key. But I think it's really true. I wish I was kidding. I tell people that sometimes communication is about strife. You know, you hit a roadblock and you want to do something and somebody else wants to do something different. You can't be afraid to have that confrontation. You know, if you keep it inside, it's going to fester inside one or both of you, and it's going to lead to more and unnecessary problems. So you can't be afraid of conflict. It's better to get it out and air it early and let people know that it's okay to do that. I mean, lots of CEOs say, my door is always open. Please come in. Not always telling the truth there. So I think if you're trying to build a team yourself, the culture you're going to create starts with openness about communication, no matter how pleasant or unpleasant the topic. Because most folks avoid confrontation. I can't say I blame them.
That's true. We've done a lot of, especially being in a company that has 2 offices and 2 different cultures between the US and Japan, which are very different in terms of communication and style and language, obviously. We've done a lot on communication because people, I think, are afraid to have these discussions, and I have to do some training to be like, you're not fighting with each other. You're like hammering out the idea and trying, you know, you're in that process of hammering out, like, whether you use his idea or her idea or their idea, you probably will come out with a better idea. Or you can even say, I think it goes to as a startup, like, you know, I hate this phrase, but like fail fast. But that's what you want to do. So like say, okay, let's try your idea for a couple weeks. If it doesn't work, we'll pivot and maybe try my idea, which is okay. And it was the biggest culture shift for me in working with Japan for the first time when I started this job 5 years ago. Was I realized, like, you know, a lot of the people we worked for, Mitsui, big corporate company, like, they don't like the risk, because that means fail. You know, if you take a risk, you could fail, and then it looks really bad, so they'd rather be stagnant. But then you don't move forward. And we were like, no, which is one of the reasons they opened an office here in Silicon Valley, because it is this big startup culture. Like, that's what you do in a startup. Every day you're taking a risk and trying, and it's expected that you fail. You want to fail, actually, because then you learn a lesson and you pivot and you do something better. And I think that, you know, when you're interviewing for new people, like really making sure, like they're okay with that. They're okay with, you know, when we interview for people, I would rather take some person who's a little less experienced, but they have this like amazing, like can-do attitude. They are fine with ambiguity, like they're good at just, you know, figuring stuff out themselves. And I ask them questions around like, what do you do when you get stuck? You know, and I want them to be not, you know, they have a great answer like, oh, I phone a friend, they do this, I look, you know, now they're like, well, I ask chat, you know, they do all these different things, you know, so someone who's less experienced, but they have this amazing attitude, they have this can-do attitude, they're willing to do, you know, we talk about, when you're in a startup, you're doing like 5 different roles, and so someone needs to understand, like, hey, you're gonna be, you know, leading up product development, but you might be doing marketing for half the time, you might have to back up in finance or, you know, solve an HR problem, you know, and that you have to be kind of like, until you can scale and get a little bigger where you have more kind of functional areas, you're doing it all. And people, you know, people have to be okay with that. And finding the people, there's a lot of people, probably a lot of you guys out there, like, think that's fun. I think that's fun. I think for me, that's why we're in this job is we don't want to come do the same thing every day. We want to like learn new stuff. We want to talk to new people, discover new ideas. And I think really, which is really important to your point of having that interview in person, is you can ask these questions and get some like reactions. And in your gut, I think a lot of times you know whether this hire is going to work or not because you get that feeling. Do they show excitement on their face when they talk about their examples? Or they just like, if it's a Zoom, like you can sort of even tell now they're kind of like reading something. And I get people have prepared answers because interviewing is nerve-wracking. Like I get nervous if I ever have to do, and I get nervous interviewing candidates, and I'm the one hired because I also am like, well, I want to sell them on Moon. I want them to like us too and tell our story. But you know, you can tell someone when they're really excited about the job and they're asking you questions. A great interview should just be a conversation. You know, I actually try not to have all the, I know when you do this, you know, they have the behavioral interviews, tell me a time. I hate those personally. I would rather just have a conversation to be like, well, tell me about your last job. And I ask that, what was your team like? What was kind of the culture like? What was your last boss like? and just to see how they tell a story and then they have a better idea of selling themselves and things like that. And I actually spend a lot of time in an interview explaining, like what we do and really what we're looking for. So the candidate, hopefully if it's the candidate that, we end up hiring, they have the idea coming in of what they're really gonna do. It's not like they get here and they're like, this is so different than what I was led to believe. Like, be really honest about what the job is. And if it's 5 hats, tell them, hey, you're probably gonna wear 5 hats. And I think that makes the best kind of experience.
I think Michelle touched on something very important in that you want to hire, especially in a small environment where they are wearing multiple hats, you want to hire for their soft skills. What are their capabilities? Are they adaptable? Are they able to pivot on a moment's notice? You can always teach them the technical stuff. You cannot teach somebody how to be on time. You cannot teach somebody how to be curious. So those are the skills that you want to look for in your candidates, because those are the things that will grow your company and will create your culture and will build your capabilities as a company, because those are the things that you can't teach. They are ingrained in your employees. They're either flexible and positive and eager and curious. If you've got those, you've got something to play with. And it can move around the system. Yeah, it makes a difference. And those that aren't afraid of failure, because failure is what creates growth. And I listen. My husband and I work from home, and so I'm able to listen to him interview candidates. And he's attacking. One of his favorite questions is, "Tell me about your biggest failure, and what did you learn from it?" And it really sets off candidates because they're like, "I want to tell you what my failures are. I want you to think I'm perfect." But for those that are willing to answer it, he gets a really good idea of what this person is built from and how do they deal with difficult situations and do they find ways to grow.
If failure leads to growth, I should be about 9 feet tall, frankly. But one of the most important things to get across to anybody new on a young team is that once you sign up, part of the commitment, part of the vision is that the most important thing above all else is not how soon your stock options vest. It's not when you earn your first dollar. It's the health of the thing to stay alive long enough to get to those points. The health of the startup supersedes everything. And that includes your need for maybe a nightlife or weekends sometimes. It's that not everybody is aware if they can do it, if they've never done it before. Yeah, sure, I can work any number of hours you want me to. Maybe they can, maybe they can't. But I think it's really important to get across to them your expectation is that you're all in this, you're all providing life support to something that's got to reach a point of some kind of sustainability. A lot of folks think a 9-to-5 mentality in a startup is not going to get you very far.
For a lot of founders, they have this sense that it's hard to get that first couple people because they have a startup, right? They might have some funding, might not have funding, and might just barely be starting out. How do you attract somebody from like a big company to be able to, that might be a big company and has the skills that you need to come and take that risk to come and work in your startup? Or what are some of the things that you can be able to do to kind of like, find the right people to bring on board?
I've never approached anybody from a big company, but I've seen plenty of people who think I'm a successful executive or manager or whatever. And how bad can it be in a startup? Some have thrived, but very few do. The transition from the structure, I had a CEO of a company who came out of Philips, everything he needed at his fingertips, phone call away. And I remember he looked up at me after the company launched. There were 4 of us. He looked up and he said, "Who knew sales was so hard?" I said, "Well, I did, but you didn't ask me." And he came and he eventually went back to Philips, a similar sized company. So I think it's laudable, but don't tie the success of your venture to someone who is unproven. I think it's too much at stake to be somebody else's learning curve. It's just too much riding on.
Good point.
A lot of that is really when the person is interested enough and has an appetite for something cool or new, as opposed to just a corporate job. That's different, right? So if someone is hearing about something that's compelling, they can get excited by that, and they know that their life can be different in that corporate structure compared to a traditional one. But you've got to have the appetite for it. Not everybody does. Not everybody. And you are picking a horse in a race. You don't know if it's going to make it. So you've got to have enough of that risk management is to say, I'm taking this risk and I'm gonna do it. See, if they have low risk, they're not gonna take the job.
I think if the biggest successes I've seen in coaching people from big companies are people who are burned out. They're not burned out in terms of hours, but they're burned out in terms of the mentality. And if your startup is something that they're really excited about, sustainability or, AI or some area they're really excited about, then, if you can find that person who just kind of wants to, feels like they can make more of a difference because maybe they're, a really senior product manager, but they're one of, 1,000 at a big tech company, but they're like the one person and they feel like they can really make a difference. You can sway them with the mission. And they know they're taking a really big pay cut, and there's obviously a huge upside for them, but they're not doing it for the money. They're a lot of times probably well off, which is great, but they really believe in the mission, and that's what you're selling them on. You're selling them about the mission and that they can, actually do something, or they can build something from, especially if you get them really early in your startup, they can build a product team you always wished you had had, or something like that, and I think you can get them motivated on that side.
What would you advise a founder, on the question of equity? Because sometimes founders find themselves in a situation where they're trying to attract somebody and they consider giving that person either equity or an advisor equity or things like that. What would you advise a founder in that situation?
I'll say we do a lot of advising on equity and compensation in the overall. A lot of founders have this notion they're going to go through 3 or 4 funding rounds and end up with 60% of the company's equity in their hands still. And we try to set expectations appropriately that if you want to grow really big, and some of them do succeed in doing this, you got to be willing to share as much as you possibly can with your employees, with your advisors, and of course the investors you want to try to attract. And I think it's a little flippant to say, never be greedy early, be greedy later. When you build something big, where the 5% of that big thing is worth way more than 80% of a small thing. And I think it's really important to say the equity is an incentive and it's an inclusivity thing, but really it's going to succeed because you help it succeed. So it's your skin in the game, whether you ask for it or not. Starting up for a startup, that should be, as we were just saying, they've got to be aware of the business they're taking. And I think equity is a good avatar standing for that, but I think it can't be the main focus.
Definitely not. The focus needs to be what the why of the company is. Equity absolutely will allow employees to feel like they have their skin in the game. But it can't be just that. That can't be their driving force, because if that is their driving force, they're not going to last for long. They have to be bought into why your company is there. What is your focus and what is your goal? Because that is what's going to drive your company to success.
And one piece of advice for any founders is don't sell too much too early. I met a company recently in Oakland that had sold 55% of its equity in its seed round. It shouldn't even be an equity round, period, let alone sell more than that. I said, I cannot possibly help you. If you want to recapitalize or start fresh with something else, maybe you can do that. But this is, and the woman was like, we had no choice. I said,
Yes, you did.
you must have had a choice. You didn't have that maybe the willpower to stand up, so maybe you're a very convincing investor. But they're not doing themselves any favors either. An early stage investor who takes a big chunk of the company is kind of dooming the venture or keeping it at a very minimal level. So it works both ways. If you raise the money, don't be afraid to challenge them to find the right investor. Don't just assume because they have money they're the right investor. Everyone's money looks the same.
Shop it around.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, because when you do have that investor that takes an equity, they also have a say within the company, right? So I would say be very careful about where you take money from.
That's right.
Right?
You're looking over your shoulder. How's it going? It's leaving me alone.
Well, and so let's say that someone does decide to give equity to an employee. How should they probably go about that? Is there some sort of vesting schedule that they should maybe follow, or should they give everything up front? What should that look like?
Well, there are companies that do it both ways. It's my suggestion that it's spread out over time, because that keeps them excited over the time, as opposed to give it all to them on the front end. And it's been done in Europe that way too, that stretches it out, so that you've got the insights and the support of people over a longer period of time. They tend to stay because of that. So it's better for the long term. And you can always add more, you can change the amounts, and do things that might be because somebody gets promoted, you can add to it, so that they don't feel like they just sucked up in year one and they get
you now have a pissed off person who owns part of your company.
Yeah.
Yeah, vesting schedules they're a mixed bag, because someone might say, I vest in a month, I'm out the door the next day. I think you could also maybe tie it to more than just time, you could tie it to milestones. First dollar, first $1 million, first major contract, some big venture. And I think it's important to be creative. You know, whether it's equity and incentive compensation, these are all intertied, and everybody has different expectations, different reactions. And a very wise person once told me that expectation is a down payment on disappointment. And I think if you say to somebody who's got to invest X number of shares, a certain percent per month, or per quarter, or per year, that sets up almost an artificial scale in their head. And it'd be nice to avoid that. I don't see much innovation there, but I feel like you go a long way if you tie maybe the milestones and performance as opposed to just the calendar. Because then you might just have to sit down and do nothing. You're not going to fire me. I'll just collect my equity. Next day I'm out.
Yeah.
Sure it's happening. I would agree with that, of course.
Great. And so when it comes to bringing on kind of like those switch on, we talked about setting expectations and really being able to communicate that vision are really important factors, right? One of those things as well that's kind of important that sometimes gets really difficult with founders, especially with those first couple of hires, is training, right? What would you advise founders on how to be able to kind of like effectively train their employees or train those first couple of hires, or if you're 5, 6, 7 people in, how should that look as far as like onboarding them into your company, getting them trained up and ready to go?
Well, when it's that small, the onboarding should just have the fundamentals so that they're in the first day taking care of whatever they need to take care of so that they can then do the work. A lot of mistakes is that people will do that over a long period of time. It makes it hard. Yeah, it falls apart, it doesn't get done. So the first stage should just be taking care of all those basics. And then if it is something that has to do with training or preparatory stuff, that can be scheduled in so that people get what they need in front of knowledge so that they can do their job well.
When you think about onboarding, there's something known as the 4 C's. Well, there's actually 5 C's. And it starts with compliance. What are the boundaries? What are employees allowed to do, and what should they not push on? The next step is to look at clarification. What is their role? What is their job within the company? What are their responsibilities? From there, culture. Do they understand what the culture of the company is? And then you want to look into their ability to work with their coworkers. Is there a connection there that they can connect with their colleagues to build their teams? And then the last piece is that extra C is the check-in. You can do everything up front, and everything may be great, but then 90 days down the road, it may not be so great. So it's important to add that 5th C in of that check-in to make sure that they're still moving in the right direction.
And I think going back to the communication and what we talked about before in the example of like firing a friend is being honest, right? And giving them, if they're not living up, if you've expected more, then having that, uncomfortable conversation of, hey, I feel like we should be, in the check-in, be honest about, hey, I feel like we should be further along here, and don't put them on the defensive, but hey, is there something you're struggling with? Is there a roadblock that you haven't, that we can help so that we can, if it's a product person, that you can have that deadline pushed up, I expected it today or whatever, a couple weeks, and make it, I always find, because obviously if you put someone, why didn't you do this? The person's gonna obviously get really defensive, they're not gonna then be open to having this conversation, but if you kind of put it back on, hey, what haven't we given you as a company? Like, did you, need more mentorship? Was there, is there because sometimes they're just afraid to ask, to be honest, like, is there a tool that you needed, but we didn't, get the subscription? Or is it, have I not communicated the vision clearly enough or helped you connect to a partner? What can I do to help you, like, be successful and have that, so they think like, oh, now I'm approachable, as say, if I'm the founder, they can come talk to me about issues they're having where they're struggling. Because I think a lot of people, they want to come in and it's hard being new. And honestly, you don't really, especially in a startup, but in any company, feel I don't feel like I know everything for like a year. But I don't want to come in, you come in and ask questions early, but especially sometimes you're like, I don't want to ask that question. I'm pretty senior. I don't want them to think I don't know what I'm doing. You get that over with, I'll be honest, like for my team, when I have new people, like I learn more from my team than I probably teach them most of the time. And I think having this like open dialogue of like, hey, do you have a, also, so they feel like you're there, if they have a great suggestion, that could be an area that's not even in their area of expertise, especially in a startup, like that's so valuable for them to come and like, be like, hey, I'm not in marketing, but I have this really good marketing idea because my friend in another company did this for this startup and it like killed, if you have that kind of policy where people can really feel comfortable telling you anything, to be honest, they will.
Yeah, that is absolutely a culture piece. One of the programs that I've worked on in the past it was called Mastering the Art of the One-to-One. And when you are establishing that connection with your employees up front, I would tell hiring managers, your impression on your future employees actually happens during the onboarding process. And the more touch points that you have with an employee, the closer you're going to get to them and the more connection you're going to have, the more engaged they're going to be from the start. And so if you master that art of one-to-one, have those meetings on a regular basis so that there is no surprise when that conversation comes up of, hey, am I failing you in some way? What are the challenges that you're facing? And so really make that connection and start to talk with your employees from the beginning.
Yeah, to circle back to like the first point we really talked about here, I think communication from a manager to an IC or from a founder to a first hire is a two-way street. I don't think it should always come from the founder. I think it should come from both ends. And I think establishing that from the very beginning is really important. I think also from the standpoint, from circling back to the beginning, is understanding your strengths, even as a founder. Like HR and talking to people is hard for HR people. So I think about, I'm coming from a founder perspective, like, having those relations with your team is not easy if you're not a people person to begin with, maybe you're a technical founder. So I think even understanding like maybe you need growth in that area as well. So I think establishing those lines of communication from the very beginning or giving yourself some training and just making everything super clear. But I do think it is a two-way street from the hire as well, to be very open and clear about what they need, what they might not be getting, and asking for clarity or as much of clarity as they can get from their founder.
It's good to be honest about the things that you think are weak, too. Be honest about that. I worked with a group that it was IT department, and they had hired a whole bunch of people that they needed, and they all left. And they wanted to talk to me about that. And I said, well, what did you do when you did the interviews? What did you tell them? And I did the list of all of it. And I said, half that's lies. They were making all these big statements about how great they are, and then these people get there and they find out it was bullshit, and so they all left. And I said, tell them the truth. And so they did it again, and they told the truth, even though it was, positive in some and negative in others, and everybody stayed. Because the expectation was clear, they bought in anyway, and they got on. So tell the truth. Where you're weak, tell them. Is there a question back here?
Yeah, this is circling back a little earlier, we were talking about compensation. I feel like there's constantly this trade-off that I'm seeing in startups, balancing fairness with stability. So like it's not uncommon in Palo Alto, right, for like a founder to like talk to a VC, get $1 million at 5% dilution, and they're already starting to hire. And the negotiation becomes, oh, do I give this founding engineer 1% or 5% of the company, right? And it's sort of funny because even if you think about giving your employees a hefty ESOP of 15%, it still doesn't technically feel fair, right? They're all starting the company at the same time. And so I was just wondering if you guys, on the other hand, right, there's a stability issue. Obviously, like there are issues with founders getting ousted come Series A, Series B when there's too much dilution, right? So anyway, there are like rational reasons why you might want to hang on to some of that equity, right? So my question is this, like how do you see founders currently remedying this trade-off, managing this trade-off well? What are some deal types people have worked at?
So I worked at a company once that was growing fast, good revenue, and they, earlier and later hires, I saw a screaming match over strike price on the options they were given. And it was insane. But people were so worked up over this fairness issue. And honestly, I don't know the answer to I really don't. I agree that 50% set aside for employees and advisors is great. Meanwhile, the two founders have 30% each, and the investors get the rest. It feels wildly unfair. Why should I give up my nights, weekends, and sanity to support people who are very inequitable towards me? I really don't know the answer. I think maybe this idea of not tying it just to time, but tying it to performance and being willing, it would be the rare founder to be willing to share larger and larger portions of equity, but you never know. I mean, if it means attracting the very best people, then maybe there's an opportunity there. But I think these things are really deeply ingrained. You know, any compensation advisor will tell you, here's the numbers. You can buck that trend, but you're probably going to have a hard time doing it. It's a really good question. I wish I had a better answer.
When you talk about the success of a startup, and aside from the founder or someone in the position of HR, people who are actually hands-on, how do they actually set the expectations for achievable success for the long-term growth of the organization? Is it a collaboration, or is the founder really driving the force of everyone working towards the direction?
I think it's definitely a collaboration. Your leadership team, you know, each of your department heads, whoever is overseeing the success of the company, they need to be working together. It goes back to that idea of rowing a boat. You know, you want everybody going in the same direction. But if everyone isn't on the same page, you're not going to get anywhere. And so your success is going to be based on your ability to have your leadership all bought in with the same goals and all understanding how to reach those goals within their specific departments.
The advisory board comes in really handy here. People with a little objective who don't have skin on the game, maybe a little bit, but they're brought in because they're experts and because they're not afraid to speak up when they think something's going wrong. I mean, Donna, you're the reigning maestro here for that, I think.
Well, yeah, if you've got funding for this investment group, they're gonna typically want a place on the board.
Of course.
And all of those goals are set with metrics for performance, and you want to be able to make sure that that is the story you're sharing with everybody. So if they understand, here's our goal for this month, here's next quarter, here's where we want to be by the end of the year, so that everybody is clear on what those are. A lot of investors now are just putting the money in based on meeting those goals too. They'll say, you know, we'll give you $7 million, but it's got to be given based on your mileage.
Dispersed. We're not going to give you the full amount. We're going to see it. From the outside looking in, I've worked with a handful of startups from a different capacity, but from my vantage point, it just seems as though the founder has the vision, and they hire HR to be sort of like a measuring stick, and then they observe the team and see how well they adapt and grow to meet these expectations for the whole. So is that really how the makeup is, or is that just a poor observation from my part?
That's interesting. It's not normative, but it's interesting.
Yeah, I think that, what do you want to talk about?
I'm still trying to answer his question. I don't think it's unrelated. I think these are very complex issues because not only is it compensation, but it's kind of valuing somebody and their contribution. And I think people who get less compensation or different terms, like a stream match or a strike price, really says to somebody, okay, I'm leaving at 5:30 because you don't really care about her. If you did, you give me more. So I think this is where the hiring process and the expectation process, I think there's, again, the room for innovation here. These go very deep into people's psychology, right? When you tie self-worth to something you're doing on behalf of somebody else, it's very complicated very quickly.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Yeah. What do you guys think is a good percentage to give people for like different kinds of partnerships that they set up? If I'm trying to set up like that kind of equity structure with the employees.
If you set up a partnership for a company that benefits them,
Yeah. So I'm gonna like launch a new healthcare company, right? So with my employees, like what are a good percentage of equity to give them? If I should set that up for partnerships.
What's a normal amount that maybe set apart for equity and stuff like that?
even for employees and advisors.
Yeah, we're trying to do it like for performance based.
Well, the standard set aside is 15, maybe 20%.
Okay.
You can't give too much more because you've got a lot of other stakeholders in the equity pool. When you said for partnerships, no equity, revenue share. People love getting money for things they've
Oh,
done,
perfect.
and they should get it.
I like it.
So you said, and you be generous about it, or make ratchet it so that the more successful it is, the higher their percentage.
I like it.
I do a lot of licensing. Licensing is all about incentive and compensation, royalties and things like that. And you'd be amazed how creative it can be. For any finance people in the room, I'm sure there's There better be a bunch of them, CFOs to go here. But I think you can be really creative, and people will appreciate that.
I like that.
Yeah, so you don't have to necessarily give equity.
Right.
You have a lot of different tools that you're, like you said, like new shares or commissions or different.
You can raise funds and do it with no equity, all revenue share. Different than debt. It's debt that you start paying off immediately, but it's not no equity.
There's nothing wrong with being creative. I mean, creativity is what drives, growth, right? And so if you want to be creative and say, well, a portion of it's going to be equity, and a portion of it's going to be revenue, and a portion of it is going to be, future growth within the company, there's a lot of different ways that you can encourage people to join in your passion.
You value them in several ways. They're bound to be more appreciative.
Yeah, but make sure that you've got a formula that's gonna hold, so that you're not doing one thing with Jan, something different with Bob.
Consistency is a
Yeah.
Oh,
very important.
consistency. Oh, that's great advice. Thank you guys.
It's that C word that nobody likes.
Consistency.
Well, any final thoughts from our panel on, important things to, send this in the way for our group?
I think, don't be afraid to think outside the box. I think, one of the things that I pride my HR practices on is find those gray areas and just live in them. Because HR can be very black and white. There are a lot of things in our world that are very black and white. But there's a lot of gray area in the middle that if you understand what your boundaries are, you can be creative and find solutions that you don't need to worry about those sides. And you can really push your company forward without breaking the rules. You might bend them a little, but you won't break them.
Yeah, from an HR perspective, I think, especially here at Moon, we have fun pushing the boundaries within HR, especially being global and working in Japan. There's a lot of different labor laws in Japan than what we see here in California, which there are a ton of laws in California. So we're always trying to think of, what are some different dynamic ways that we can kind of push the boundaries legally to make, work here for all the other employees more fun and flexible and, enjoyable for them.
Yeah, HR is pretty attentive to what the rules are and things like that. I was in a meeting one time with a guy who was proposing something. I said, I can't wait until we can do that when it's legal. I mean, you do have to be there to be the voice when they don't know the difference.
Well, it's only illegal if you get caught, right? So my contribution would be like the 9th C word here, which is culture, and that human culture is not planned, right? It's people come together, there's wars, there's famines, whatever, and people evolve to the conditions, and that becomes the culture, right? Company culture, on the other hand, is completely planned. Has to be, really ought to be. You just let things develop like in a petri dish, who knows what you're going to find. So I think it's really important that if and when you start something, culture is what you try to convey as the structure you're going to build, the framework within which you're going to operate and grow and resolve conflict. I've noticed that people are great at creating conflict and not that good at resolving it. And an open company culture can do that. There are lots of case studies where you can go read about Uber, you want to read about hostile and toxic cultures, right? But there's a lot to be learned from that.
I think Uber's kind of like the poster child for
It is, it really is. And he's back out there raising money.
I think my final thing is have that close group around you that you can run your ideas, check yourself. I think, hey, I do this with I have a close group of people professionally, personally, and when I'm unsure, know what you don't know. And then if you're going back to the conflict, if there's a discussion you had that you're, as a boss now because you're a founder when you're hiring your first employees, or, I go, oh, I did this, and, you're questioning yourself, right? Should I have done this? Should I, did my ego get in the way, or pride or something like that? And you go to those trusted people who are not afraid to be like, yeah, you were a jerk, and being like, yeah, you should, or no, you had to kind of, get your vision across, and that's your North Star, and you need to stick to it, or whatever. And I think having kind of that trusted group of people, no matter, and it'll serve you well in life in general, but, starting out, if, hopefully you all hit it really big with your companies, and then you especially need that kind of group that will kind of put you in your place when you're unsure.
I'd love to hear a recommendation of a book or something, an article or something that you didn't write. Don is very prolific. But I'm just curious, just because I'm not a big one of business books, but there are some good ones out there. I have something in mind, but I'm just curious.
It's a great point. Thanks, Paul.
I don't know if I have one. I think the one that really like helped me the most in my career, to be honest, was radical candor. You probably all have heard and read, just because it gave me permission to be like really honest and not be afraid. Like obviously there's a way to say things, but it gave me more permission, especially to more senior level executives, to go back and be like, no, that wasn't cool, or I'm not going to be afraid to say how I really feel, or a crazy idea that I had that's not even in my area, and also to go to employees to say, we joke around because everybody, in Japan it's actually really, really difficult to fire somebody, like almost impossible legally. And there's people, so then there sometimes is the sense of they can say anything because what are you going to do, fire them? You can't really. But you can have this kind of radical conversation to be like, you seem really miserable. If you're this miserable, maybe this isn't like, what is it you really want to do in your life? Like life is short, and it's almost like you become a little bit of a therapist to say like, if you're really like this unhappy, is there something we can do to change it? Probably not. And if not, like what do you really want to be doing? Because life is short, maybe this isn't the job for you. And there's a way to get, and they kind of start thinking like, you're right. And we're like, what can we help you to get to the next thing that you're super excited about? And I think that book really helped me kind of like have the courage to just have those conversations.
And the next thing may be or may not be inside the company.
Yeah.
I met a Norwegian guy this winter in January, and he's like, you heard this book, Radical Candor? It changed my life. It's great. So my book is a somewhat racy title. It's by Bob Sutton at Stanford. It's the best HR management book ever. It's called The No Asshole Rule.
Oh, I heard that.
Yeah, I have it on my phone. It's so fun. I saw him speak once and I was dying. We all were. But it speaks true. We all know this. We all have our own radar, our own tolerance. This book encapsulates it. And the best thing was the story is all about the messages he got from people who read it. I cannot believe what I used to put up with. Never again. So, still in print. And if he's still around, he's hilarious. He's just never. So, my recommendation.
I think I'm going to age myself here, but Ken Blanchard wrote a book called Gung Ho. And this was popular back in, the 90s, I want to say. But the core of Gung Ho is three different pieces, and it's based off of a Native American think tank. And the first one is the spirited squirrel. And when you think about a squirrel and they're collecting their nuts and they're preparing for the winter, they have a goal in mind. The next one is the way of a beaver, and when a beaver is building their dam, they're working together. They all know which direction they're going. And then the last one is the gift of the goose, is that when they make their success, they then cheer each other on. Just like if you watch a flock of geese, they're all cheering each other on as they're flying in a particular direction. And so when you take those three principles, you can run your organization just off of those three principles and find success, because you're developing your goals, everybody's moving the same direction, and then you're cheering each other on when you met those goals.
Well, I taught critical thinking for 42 years. I have tons of books that all are tied to critical thinking skills and how we use it, but I also am very deeply interested in creative problem solving. And one of the mistakes that many people make is that they don't sort out the creativity from the facts, or they don't pay attention to the facts so that they can get critical thinking. So anything in that category is what I focus on for helping people understand the facts, and then go into this section, which is when you turn your head and you go that way, you're creating solutions. And if you're ever in a conversation and somebody's bothering you, just do that, because it will change the whole discussion. And that's what you want to be able to bring to the discussions where people are disagreeing. Let me think, what if we thought about this? You're not saying no to the other person, you're just putting another thing on the table. And when you do that, you're going to get better results. My partner always solves problems better than me. I'll bring a problem, put it on the table, and he'll tell me how he'd solve it. I'm going, damn it, it's better than my idea. I love it, though, that we can do that inclusively. And if we can train ourselves to do that in the cultures of work, you're going to be so proud of the kinds of decisions that come out, or ideas, or directions that you didn't have, but boy, you had the talent there that brought it forward. Anything in that category is fair.
And it's hard to be too well read. You gotta read constantly. I read constantly. I can't imagine a day without it.
I think the book I would probably pick is Educated by Seth Godin, because to really kind of like understand like the world that we kind of live in nowadays. I mean, we don't live in a world of job security anymore. We don't live in a world where you can really just be focused on doing one thing forever, right? And sometimes you have to be able to create your own path, and create your own way, make yourself a little bit more indispensable. So I think that book is fantastic in being able to help, especially a lot of startup people in the startup space who are kind of thinking like, well, people may be considering joining the startup space as well.
There's an awesome book called The 48 Laws of Power. Someone recommended me, Robert Greene.
It's a good book.
It is so comically harsh. Makes Machiavelli look like Mother Teresa. But you think, if I really, really want to, by any means necessary to win, that's your book. It's awesome. There are guidebooks to what not to do as well.
Yeah.
That's a great, and there's like 3 in the series. I don't have the courage to buy the other 2.
Yeah. Well, we do have a question.
Do you guys have any framework like top 3 things that we have to do or keep in our mind to maintain healthy relationship with our co-founders so that we survive this journey of all challenges, right? It's not an easy journey, it's not really a roller coaster journey. So, like some 3 things that it's like a hard and fast rule that we have to follow. And what are your thoughts?
So I mean, we're in California. Employees in California is a whole different world. And so on an HR side, you want to make sure that you understand what your boundaries are with your employees. That is absolutely an important thing. When it comes to, gaining those investors and getting that financial gain, I would say that part of it also has to be the willingness to fail and the willingness to have a backup plan. What is that backup plan? What are you going to do if you do fail? And how are you going to continue to move forward? Because if your response is, oh, well, I failed, I give up, you're not going to get that financial support. So they want to know that you're going to be able to stick with it even in the hardest times.
I'd say communicate, empathize, brainstorm. Find out what's wrong, fix it, maybe decide it's not a good fit. You never know until you get into it. But don't be afraid to approach difficult subjects. They'll appreciate it, and you will too, I think.
Oh, the last thing I was going to say is, I think giving each other grace too. I think it's like a stressful time. I've never been a founder myself, but I've worked on projects here at Moon, and you're sort of going into something blind that maybe you've never done before, or you're a second-time founder, whatever your situation might be. But especially if you're co-founding a company, I think you're probably both very stressed and tired, whatever it might be. So I think just all these things, and then give each other a little bit of grace during the process.
I think my last one is just laugh. Like it's hard, like Monique said, it's hard work. Like try to find something fun in it every day, whether it's just, a stupid like TikTok you show your co-founder and you guys are laughing about it, or a cartoon that you can read, or you talk about a funny like TV show that everybody's binge watching. Just make sure that even if it's just playing like a really silly song, I do that at home when I'm super stressed out, is I'll put on I put on old school Britney Spears or something super ridiculous, or NSYNC, like some boy band that I remember the dance from the 90s. And I just dance in my little office because I don't know, it just puts me in a bed instead of just sitting there wallowing or whatever, because no one wants to feel that, but you just make yourself laugh. Or, when you see, if there's big deadlines and everyone's super stressed because they're trying to hit this big deadline for the next, release or something like that, just, go do something fun. I remember one of my old jobs, we were in the middle of, for HR annual reviews and performance management, it's the most stressful time of the year. We're in it, right now. And our team was so stressed that I went to this place in San Jose where you just break things. And we just took baseball bats and crushed bottles, and it was the most fun thing we've ever done. And we were just laughing and at least for like 2 hours, we had like 0 stress. And I think it's really important. It doesn't have to be that extreme. HR is hard sometimes, so it needs to be that extreme. But even just like little moments where you just have to laugh. I think that's my last piece of advice.
I always have a hula hoop in my office, and if there was stuff going on, I'd make the person use the hula hoop first, and then we'll talk. And that calmed me down every time. That hula hoop saved every time. So have something silly that turns the head.
I used to keep a set of blow-up punching gloves, boxing gloves, and I would keep them hung on the back of my door. And anytime somebody would want to come in and be really frustrated about something, they close the door, and they'd see those boxing gloves, and I said, you need to put them to use. And that immediately calms them down. It's being willing to be silly and to not forget, what your reason is for doing this in the first place. Because if you're not enjoying what you're doing, why are you doing it?
It's like that blow-up sumo suit, which I'm sure Vensure appreciates, ridiculing the national sport. But it's pretty funny when you see it.
I think one of the important things is remember to be human, right? Remember to be a person, right? I mean, you are a leader, you're leading that team, but at the end of the day, people are going to connect with you because you're a real person that they can relate to. So you don't have to be a machine, right? Well, I appreciate everybody's time. Thank you, everybody, for attending as well. We have some drinks and some light refreshments in the back, so we'll go ahead and break out into some networking. Thank you so much.
Thank you, guys.
Tonight was fantastic. Enjoyed the great discussion that we were able to have. Had some great questions from some startup founders, and then as well getting input from other advisors and others. HR is one of those things that a lot of people don't really understand very well, right? So we help. I think this discussion helped a lot of people be able to understand what is the value of HR, especially in that formation stage. What are things that founders really should consider that sometimes fall under quote-unquote HR, but things that they shouldn't leave to the side. The highest goal I could hope for is, not only meeting founders, but building connections with a lot of other people who are within the space and continuing to grow. I think we definitely got that goal to be able to kind of build it and had a lot of great connections and being able to create an opportunity for people to learn about some of these fundamental ideas when it comes to starting your own company.
Great thing, payment price,